You know, some of the most remarkable people that I've ever come in contact with are these people. They're the believe in spite of people. You've come in contact with them, I know you have. You've experienced having those conversations with people where you enjoy, you talk to them, you begin to ask them questions, you know the hurdles and struggles that they're walking through, and even in the midst of it, they find joy. They find encouragement. They find this uncanny peace despite the most difficult and anxious struggles that they can find themselves in. I know some of you, just in the last week, the last 18 days really, you've experienced this. There's this anxiousness, this struggle within about what is going to happen, what's going on, what does tomorrow even hold? And yet these believe in spite of people, they're inspiring because you look at them and you begin to say, how in the world can they continue to have faith knowing what they're going through? You know, Dr. Francis Collins, he is a doctor, he's an author. He actually is an incredibly smart man. Here's how smart he is. He is the director of the Human Genome Project. Now, if you're asking what is a genome, I'll tell you what a genome is. It is the organism's complete set of DNA. In fact, it is made up of roughly 3.1 billion letters, which is crazy. But Dr. Collins, as a med school student making the rounds in North Carolina, a 27-year-old atheist, he would constantly come in contact with these believe in spite of people. And he would engage with them, he would connect with them, and he would hear their story, he would hear their struggle, and he would be fascinated by the fact that even in the midst of the terminal illness they have, that they still could have such strong and dynamic faith. In fact, Dr. Collins accounts in his book, The Language of God, he made this statement. He said, if faith was a psychological crutch, it must be a very powerful one. If it was nothing more than a veneer of cultural tradition, why were these people not shaking their fist at God and demanding their friends and family to stop all this talk about a loving and a benevolent supernatural power? In the midst of everything they're going through, why are they continuing to have faith and confidence in God, knowing that what they're going through is going to cost them their life? It's a terminal illness. They're probably never going to be well again. See, one afternoon, Dr. Collins interacted with one such lady that completely changed his paradigm. You see, this lady was struggling with congenital heart failure. She was going to be passing any moment. And she turned the question on Dr. Collins, and she had always shared what she believed. She'd always shared what was going on in her life, the peace and confidence she had. And one day when Dr. Collins was in, he asked her this question. So, doctor, what do you believe? You know what I believe. You've heard my story. You see my confidence in the midst of the pain I'm going through. You know what I believe. So, doctor, what is it that you believe? Dr. Collins, in that moment, a devout atheist at the time, he was a little put back. His face was flushed, and he stammered out, basically looking back and saying this, and I'm not really sure what to believe. Dr. Collins would later use this as a catalyst to his belief structure. In fact, Dr. Collins would call it this willful blindness and arrogance is what kept him from really being able to pursue what Jesus was all about. And as he continued to open up questions, as he continued to look and to explore and to think about who is this man they call Jesus, he realized that the claims about Jesus were absolutely compelling. The claims about Jesus were so compelling that once he began to look, he realized there was more than he ever needed, which is interesting. Because just like Dr. Collins, we looked last week at John's account of Jesus. And John really stepped into this idea, this statement that I know you've heard before in our current day. I know you've heard people talk about this, but this doesn't carry a whole lot of weight when this is the basis for why we believe. You've heard this before. Christianity is just about, you just need to believe. We talked about it. Just believe, brother. What is wrong with you? But Christianity is not about just believing or taking it by faith. You see, that isn't what Peter and James and John and the different disciples and guys that Jesus hung out with, that's not why they followed Jesus. You see, they didn't follow Jesus just because of faith. It was so much more than that. In fact, they would caution you if this is the only reason you're following Jesus. You see, they followed after Jesus. They put their belief in Jesus because of what they saw and what they heard. And John encouraged his readers, he encouraged you, he encourages me to follow after Jesus, not just because of a hopeful plea that maybe it's real, but he encourages us to follow after Jesus because of what he had seen and because of what he heard. In fact, John, who later in his life, he wrote a letter talking about the way that the love Jesus shared for him completely changed his life. He wrote in the beginning of one of his letters, he wrote this, he says, "That which was from the beginning, which we've heard, which we've seen with our eyes, and which we've looked at and with our hands have touched." This Jesus guy that I want you to know about, this Jesus that I got to spend time with, I saw him. I saw him die and I saw him come back to life. After the resurrection, I saw his nail-pierced hands. And he went on to say that this we proclaim concerning the word of life. The life appeared. We have seen it and we testify to it. And we proclaim to you what we have seen and what we have heard. You see, John outlived several of his friends. His friends, those that he spent time with, the other disciples, they died a martyr's death. The majority of them, their confidence in Jesus was so strong that they were willing to give their life on behalf of it. But John was one, he didn't die from martyrdom. He was actually exiled to the island of Patmos. And it's there where he ended up breathing his last breath at an old age. But during that time, while he was on the island of Patmos, he actually we believe that he had some scribes that wrote for him, but he actually began to write a document about the life of Jesus. And he wrote it, and we've got it today. It's the Gospel of John. And within this book, within this document, we see John's account of who Jesus is. And we begin to see why John wrote it. You see, he didn't just write the document of John. He wrote it in such a way, not just to convey information. He wrote it in such a way to inspire you to believe. He had an agenda. And he spelled it out for you in the beginning or at the end of the book. After he got the chance to see Jesus come back to the life, here's what he said. He said, Jesus performed many signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. There were many things that Jesus did. There were many signs and wonders and miracles that we got the chance to see Jesus do. And within my writing of Jesus' life, I don't have time to tell you everything. But here's what I want to tell you. But these that I'm about to talk to you about, they're written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. See, the sequence with which John writes the signs and wonders, it's the sequence with which he really processed and became completely adamant that Jesus was who he says he was. This is why he became a follower. This is why he became an adamant believer that Jesus is his Savior. So he organized them in such a way so that those that were reading it may read the signs and wonders and that they may process what John saw and ultimately believe. So within the document that John wrote, we see that there were 7 signs that John talks about. Now, these aren't all the signs, but these are the signs that John saw that were so paramount for his belief structure and that he wanted to convey to us even a couple of centuries later that we may believe as well. So today we're going to look at the second sign, the sign that if you were to have one of those paper Bibles, and I know some of you still have that, and I think it's great. In fact, this is possibly one of my favorite ways to read the Bible, to read the documents that account for Jesus' life, is to grab the pencil and paper and my Sharpie pen and write in the Bible and see what it says and what's going on and how it can challenge me. But the heading that you would find in this section is actually the healing of a nobleman's son. So what we find is after the wedding, which we talked about last week, the first sign was a wedding where they ran out of wine, and Jesus' mom points to him and says, hey, come here. We need to turn this water into wine. And so he does just that. After that sign, after that wedding, we see that Jesus ventured down to Jerusalem, and there he partook in Passover, and that's when he actually cleansed the temple. He went into the temple and he saw that the majority of people were making a mockery of the very house that God sent his son to declare. And in the midst of this, one of the things that's fascinating that we see is as Jesus is leaving Jerusalem is John documents that many people who saw what Jesus was doing in Jerusalem, that many people saw these signs that he was performing and they believed in his name. Right from the beginning, they saw what Jesus was doing and they began to believe. That many people began to believe based upon what they saw Jesus do. In fact, one night as Jesus was walking, he ran into an individual named Nicodemus, and Nicodemus came to him at night for fear that people might see him investigating the claims of Jesus. And he begins to ask, what must I do to believe? And Jesus begins to go through this idea that you must be born again. There's something brand new at stake. I have come that you may have life. But Nicodemus would go away processing and thinking about what was at stake. And a little while later, as he's venturing north back up to Galilee and to Cana, where we're going to talk about in a few moments, he encounters the woman at the well. And this is a woman that we don't know her name. It could have been Sarah for all we know. But we know her as the woman at the well. And this is a woman that Jesus encountered. Jesus walked over to the Samaritan woman and began to inquire of her, ask questions, to document what is going on in this life as if she was the only one that mattered in his life at that moment. And sure enough, Jesus began to tell her everything that was going on, the good, but especially all of the bad things that she hoped nobody would ever know. And in the midst of this, Jesus loved her right where she was with a love that was so remarkable that she believed exactly who Jesus was. It says, in fact, this little foreshadowing, she went on to her village and she told her village exactly what was going on and about this man that she just encountered. And it says that her entire village became followers of Jesus. They believed based upon the testimony of the woman at the well, which is fascinating. The stories of the woman at the well carried on, and without seeing, there was belief, which is an invitation for you and an invitation for me. So Jesus gets into Galilee, and we'll pick up the story, the sign. When Jesus gets there, it says this, that once more he visited Cana in Galilee, which we talked about. This is where the wedding was just last week. It wasn't last week, but when we were with you last week, once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick. Now, sign 1, wedding, joyful occasion. Sign 2, a little more of a heartbreaking scenario. You have an individual whose son is deathly sick. It's interesting that Jesus was in the middle of these first 2 signs, was one, a joyful occasion, and one, a heartbreaking scenario. And the beautiful thing is Jesus is still for both. He still wades into the middle. Even though our circumstances can be bleak, Jesus is still in the middle of it. And when there's great joy, he is in the middle of that too. But there's 2 important details that John points out. In fact, it says that, and there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick, and it says where the son was. The son was at Capernaum. Something to note is the distance between Capernaum and Cana is roughly about an 8 or 9 hour walk, which would be a long time. Maybe you were sophisticated enough that you had a horse-drawn carriage, or you had a horse, which might draw it down to about 2 to 3 hours. But for Jesus to get from Cana all the way to Capernaum with the crowd that was following him, you're looking at roughly an 8 or 9 hour walk. But beyond that, this was a royal official. This was a Jewish aristocrat. This was an individual who had great clout, great standing in their community. Now, there were Pharisees and there were Sadducees of the day. The Pharisees were individuals that they were very smart. They were religiously smart. They believed in the Old Testament and the Jewish covenant, and they took it to heart. They were very clear on the do's and don'ts, and oftentimes they bended the rules a little bit to make themselves feel better and to make other people understand how great they are. And then you had the Sadducees, who were a little bit more of the deterministic type people. They believed that fate was in control, and fate controlled your health, it controlled your wealth, it controlled everything. And this Jewish aristocrat, this royal official, he was a Sadducee, which basically he believed that fate was in control. But yet, it's fascinating when it hits his family, he kind of tosses out his theology, his belief structure. He goes from being a royal official to being a desperate father. And John continues on and he says this, when this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and he begged him to come and to heal his son who was close to death. Now, why didn't he send servants? I'm sure as a royal official, he had servants he could have sent, said, hey, go get Jesus. I need you to bring him over here. But instead, it says that he went on his own. Not only that, but he went, and this the verb tense for this word begged right here. It's this idea of pleading over and over and over. In other words, he was very willing to absolutely become nothing. He didn't care what people thought of him. He didn't care what people saw him as. He understood that his son was close to death, and there's only one way that we can bring him back, and it's in that man. Now, the way Jesus responds to this might seem a little harsh, but what Jesus is simply trying to do is he's addressing a wider audience. He's addressing a bigger crowd. When he says this, he looks at the man and looks at the crowd that's around him, and he says this, unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you will not believe. Unless you see signs and wonders, you people will not believe. Which, if you're the individual, if you're the royal official, you're sitting there thinking, what? I don't know what you're trying to say. But you see, Jesus knew that he was talking to a wider audience. Jesus knew that this was bigger than he could ever imagine. And so what he does is he sits there and he understands that the people that are watching this, they're wanting signs, they're wanting wonders. They know that if they are to believe, that it will take something miraculous. So Jesus sits back and says, well, if that's what you want, let's have some fun. Let's give the people what they want. Let's enjoy this for a little bit. But the Jewish aristocrat, the royal official sitting there saying, wait a second, I don't want it to be an object lesson. I don't want this to be about a theology lesson. This is serious. He pulls Jesus down and he says, Sir, come down before my child dies. I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what's going on, but here's what I know is my child is about to die. And if you do not come with me, this might not end well. If you don't follow me home, not only might my son be dead, but my wife might not want anything to do with me. Jesus, there's only two options here. Either you come with me and my son lives, or you don't, and we don't get to see him again, which is fascinating. I mean, why does this royal official believe that Jesus is capable of saving his son? I mean, he's only heard the stories of Jesus. He's only heard the stories of what's going on. And so why does this guy put all of his faith and all of his trust in believing that this is a possibility? Well, Jesus looks at him. He's saying, hey, sir, come down before my child dies. And Jesus politely but very casually tells him, go. In fact, sir, come down before my child dies. And Jesus just looks at him and says, okay, well, you just need to go. Just go. In fact, what Jesus says next is absolutely fascinating because Jesus is just basically casually telling this individual, just go about your business. Just don't hurry, don't worry. It's all going to be okay. Just go. And here's why. Because your son will live. Wait, Jesus, hold up a second. I came to you because he's laying on his bed, deathly ill. I came to you because I need you to come with me. This isn't going to be like, I need you to follow me because my son is deathly ill. What do you mean? Just go, my son will live. What? And what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to walk home and see my wife? What, do I need to go get her flowers on the way home? Because if I go with flowers, maybe it'll be a little bit less hurtful that I didn't come with you. Flowers always make a wife happy, but I don't know that that's going to help the scenario at hand. Maybe we just need to wait till the heat of day and just go home and just meander on home and just relax and just wait till the sun passes away so that we don't have to worry about seeing the hurt in my wife's face. You see, the truth is, this is where we live, isn't it? I mean, many of us, we live in this tension that you believe, you understand, you know what Jesus has called you to do, but the truth is, there's so many times where we are called to do something and we do not have the truth. We don't have the idea. We don't have the marching orders. We believe and we want to believe, but we're sitting here trying to figure out, is Jesus going to really show up? Can I really believe him? Can I really believe that what he has to say is true? This is where we live. This is where, when we come in contact with those people that believe in spite of, it's so inspiring because many of us wish we could have that kind of faith. You see, this isn't just where we live. This is ultimately the day. This is a lifetime that many of us wrestle with that's been reduced to a single day. So we sit there and we think about this. We've asked Jesus to take care of our hurdles. We've asked Jesus to help us, and we keep getting these unanswered prayers. We keep getting these ideas and thoughts that we're struggling with, and we want Jesus to give us an answer, and yet so many times we come in contact with these people that are inspiring to us. And that's Dr. Collins' story. He encountered an individual that believed in spite of, and he chose to investigate based upon her faith, which is fascinating. And so the nobleman stares into oblivion, understanding that he's got to move forward. His entourage awaits, and so finally he just says, let's go. He takes a deep breath, and they began walking. And he makes a decision that many of us have been making a decision for over 2,000 years to do. He makes a decision that is an encouragement, that is a challenge for you and me, and it's a decision that we've been asked to make as well. And the question is this, and what Jesus is asking is ultimately, will you walk by faith? Will you step forward even if you don't have all the information? Will you step forward even if you don't have a significant yes? Will you move forward on Jesus' word alone? But this isn't enough. You see, this man rises up, and basically Jesus is implying that ultimately we need to move forward. We need to go on our merry way with confidence that what Jesus says is true. In fact, the man believed. The man actually believed the word Jesus spoke to him. The man saw what was going on, and so he allowed his behaviors to change based upon his belief in what Jesus had said. See, it goes on. It says, the man believed the word Jesus spoke to him, and so he departed and went home. He decided to go home. He walked away. He said, let's go. Let's keep on rolling. Let's continue walking. And he believed that whatever Jesus said would somehow, some miraculous way, be true. You see, what this man did is he walked by faith and not by sight. Can you imagine what that must have been like? I mean, some of you can. Some of you have been on the face of, some of you have faced some of the most challenging times. You've faced addiction. You've faced the loss of loved ones. You've been at a point where you've just been begging God to do what only God can do. And on the other side, you just took a step and you saw Jesus show up in your life. You can relate to this idea of just having to step forward, to take a step by faith and not by sight. So this nobleman, he's on his way, he's got his entourage with him, and John documents what happens next. It says, while he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that the boy was living. what Jesus had said came true. And the cool thing is this, is it wasn't necessarily that this noble man was excited about the fact that he was living. There was something inside of him that believed it. So he pushes a little bit further. It's not just enough to know that he's better. He begins to ask. It says that when he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left. I can't imagine what it must have been like, the chill that ran down his spine, the eyes that are filled with tears, and he probably peered over his shoulder to look back to Cana thinking, he did it. Jesus did exactly what he said he would do. You see, then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus said to him, your son will live. I'm sure it wasn't a meandering at that point. He jumps on his horse, and he starts kicking that horse. We got to get home. We got to get home. I can't wait to tell my wife what happened. And as he's getting close, the wife comes running to the door and says, guess what? Our son, who was once on the door of death, is now alive. And he's like, I know. Like, tell me something I don't know. And I'm sure she was a little stunned. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean you know? How do you know? I know the servants came to you, but why aren't you so surprised? Why do you have such confidence that you knew he was going to be alive? And at that point, I'm sure that he began recounting the story about how he ran and he saw Jesus in Cana, and he began to plead with him, and Jesus began saying these things that he began talking about how signs and wonders, and let's do this thing. And then he says, go, your son's living. And I was like, Jesus, I don't know, but I jumped up and I walked. John accounts, I'm speculating, I'm reading with my senses, but John accounts, he says, so this man and his whole household believed. This was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. As a result of what happened, as a result of what was going on, as a result of what the noble man saw, his entire probably aristocratic Sadducee family became followers of Jesus. You see, walking by faith can be such a valuable thing, but it can be challenging. You see, this isn't just walking by hope. This isn't just wishful thinking. This is legitimately walking with this confidence that what Jesus has told you and what Jesus has told me is going to come true. It's walking with this confidence that who Jesus claims to be is actually a reality. It's walking with the confidence that God is your heavenly Father. That you are actually forgiven, that you are loved, that you are loved beyond comparison. You see, for some of us, that is the hardest thing for us to really get to the bottom of, is this idea that there is a God that loves you regardless of what you've done, that there is a God that would forgive you knowing the worst things you've ever done. Point in case, the woman at the well. You see, Jesus loves you with an incredible love, and ultimately, it's a unique brand of love that he's calling us to. You see, one of the things that Jesus called you and called me to do is to love with this unique love. It is a love that ultimately, this as I have loved you loved. Love, sorry, it's not a verb, it's just a word. It's this, as I have loved you love. It's living with this confidence, this idea that in my faith, the sacrifices, the generosity, the things that I give for other people are not in vain, but they're anchored in the hope, not because I want to help them, but because Jesus has helped me first. And so I want to be generous with what he's done in my life. You see, ultimately, that was what got Dr. Collins to believe. It was Dr. Collins' interaction with an individual who, knowing her circumstances, was able to look at him and have faith and have hope, knowing that she was loved. See, at the end of John's account, Jesus rallies the disciples together, and knowing that all the signs have come to an end, knowing that everything was about to be finished off in the book, Jesus encourages them. And John documents something that Jesus says, and I believe he documented it not just so that we can have the information, but he documented it with you in mind. He documented it hoping and praying that one day you would hear this, that you would read this, and you would be encouraged. Listen to what John says, documenting what Jesus had said to the 11 at the time. Because you have seen me, you have believed. You've seen the signs and wonders. You have believed. But he goes on and he talks ultimately through John's account to you. He says, but blessed are those who have not seen. Blessed are those who have not seen what's going on and still believe. Blessed are those who believe not based upon what they've seen and heard, but who believe based upon what other people have seen, who believe based upon what other people have heard, who believe based upon the stories of those that have come before them. And ultimately, if you were to ask John today, he would just remind you. You see, I was just a bystander. I was a bystander who thought it was absolutely important for me to document the life of this rabbi from Nazareth. But what I want you to know is I don't just want to give you information. I don't want you just to know the story. I want to inspire you with the story, because the things that I saw, they turned my life upside down. And everywhere I went, I wanted to share what I had seen and what I had heard. And he wanted people to know far and wide. He wanted you to know that this is bigger than you can ever imagine. In fact, these stories, these things, that what John documents, these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's the Son of the living God, and that by believing you may have faith in his name, and that you may have hope. And that ultimately, as we journey through the life of John, as we look at Jesus' life through John's eyes, our prayer and our hope is that you would find that even in these troubling times, even when we don't know what tomorrow and what 2 days and 3 days and 4 days from now may look like, that you and I, that we may have confidence that God is who he says he is, that Jesus is who he says he is, and that what Jesus says of you, that he loves you, he cares for you, and he is for you, that we may be able to live that out. You see, you may be thinking that what the nobleman went through, that is part of your story, that's what has happened to you. And I want to encourage you. There might be a prayer that you are still praying and it is unanswered, and you are on the verge of checking out of faith and checking out of everything religious. I want to encourage you. Rather than unchecking the box, would you do what the nobleman did? Would you begin to examine the claims that John put forth in his writing of who Jesus was? Would you begin to read from a different perspective, not just to gain information, but to really see what John had to say, and how in reading what John had to say, that we might believe that Jesus is who he says he is, and that you're loved, and that you're valued, and that Jesus died for you. Now, I love Francis Collins, and another thing that he said, and I want to end with this, because I think this is so appropriate. You see, one time he was talking about just life and how we observe and we absorb things. He began to say it's not enough just to read the notes on the page. At some time, you have to hear the music. And I believe that is John's invitation for you today, not just to consume the information, but to be inspired, to hear the music, to see the detail that John found so incredibly imperative. Let's pray. God, we love you. And we thank you so much for today. God, I thank you for the story of the nobleman and how he walked by faith. God, even in his reality, hoping and praying that he would be able to have Jesus by his side as they continue back to Capernaum. That wasn't a reality, but the way the story unfolded was better and bigger than we can ever imagine. And God, I thank you. I thank you for the nobleman's example. And God, may we follow suit. May we this week choose to follow, even when we don't have march, even when we can't see what's going on. May we choose to follow and believe that what you say is absolutely true. Jesus, we love you and we thank you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.